James Forbes, the CEO of the Jane Goodall Institute of Australia, about their work here to promote the conservation of chimpanzees and other great apes as our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom, and through the wonderful Roots and Shoots program, which aims to empower the next generation to be socially and environmentally conscious citizens of our shared planet. The Jane Goodall Institute of Australia was founded in 2007. Their philosophy is centred on the interconnectedness of animals, people, and the environment, with a purpose to inspire actions that connect people with animals and our shared environment. Dr. Jane Goodall is known to us all, a world-renowned primatologist, ethologist, humanitarian, conservationist, and UN messenger of peace. She founded the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977, and it now has offices in some 35 countries around the world. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome everyone to another conversation. And I have with me today James Forbes, who is the Executive Director of the Jane Goodall Institute of Australia. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Kathie. Nice to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and a bit about the Jane Goodall Foundation or Institute in Australia, because we all know Jane's work, but what are you doing here?
Sure. Well, my background is I've been in the charity sector for about 20 years, and prior to that, I was in the private sector. My focus has been for most of my time in the charity sector on conservation. It's an area that I'm particularly passionate about. And 4 years ago, I got the great opportunity to work for one of the most famous women in the world, Jane Goodall, and her institute, which was established in the United States in 1977, only got going here in 2007. So we're a fairly young office. There are 26, 27 offices of the Institute around the world, and her Roots and Shoots program, which is the youth program, is operating in about 60 countries. So Roots and Shoots operates in places where there aren't offices, if that makes sense, because it's a grassroots movement. And literally anyone can get a Roots and Shoots group going anywhere in the world.
So what is Roots and Shoots?
So Roots and Shoots is a grassroots youth program that Jane developed in Tanzania in the early 90s. After she had a group of young people coming to her saying, we're really worried about the problems that are going on in the world, and we don't feel like the adults are doing anything about it. And she said, well, you have the power and the agency to make change yourself. So the very principle of Roots and Shoots is about inspiring young people to have the confidence and the faith in themselves to make a difference in the communities around them. And that's what we try and do through the Jane Goodall Institute in Australia, is we support that program or drive activity into it by having a suite of educational programs through schools particularly, that gives young people the tools that they need to start their own project or their own program.
So what are some of the programs or projects that young people have started with that program?
Oh, they number into the thousands and tens of thousands around the world. Basically they're encouraged to pick one program that benefits animals, one that benefits people, or one that benefits the broader environment, or they can do something that does all three. And that's something that's important, because what distinguishes the Jane Goodall Institute from a lot of the conservation organisations is we're very people-focused. So we're very much focused in on what are the drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change, and what are some of the impacts. And those impacts are being experienced or felt by people. In Africa, where we work, obviously our traditional base is working for the protection of chimpanzees, because that's where Jane started her work more than 60 years ago in Tanzania. But that's broadened out now, and the Roots and Shoots program is a lot broader in its scope than just focusing on chimpanzee protection, and obviously that doesn't apply outside of sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the ways in which JGI works in Africa is really thinking about how we address some of the root causes of biodiversity loss. And a lot of that has to do with poverty. And so it's really important that we think about programs that build economic empowerment at the same time as addressing biodiversity loss and environmental impacts. A lot of organisations are squarely focused on those things alone, and they have absolute merit, and there's a real value in doing that. But I find that the sector, if I have a critique of it, is that there's a lot of siloing. And I think that what we try to do is to break down those silos. We try to be really collaborative, working with other organisations, and essentially bringing people into the conversation, and young people, most importantly, because they're the ones that will be inheriting the earth. So if we're not focused on them and developing their hope for the future, what hope do any of us have? And that's the kind of message that Jane talks about. It's really about how do we empower the next generation? How do we give them the tools and the inspiration to take action and support that action? But she's very strong on this notion of not telling them what to do, letting them conceive or identify, using their minds to kind of turn over and seeing what's around them, observing what's going on in their community and where they feel they might be able to make a difference. And so that's how Roots and Shoots operates. It's really about, the kids deciding, or the young people, I don't have to be kids, but young people deciding, this is a problem I've observed in my community. And the reason she talks about this is, there's that old maxim of thinking global and acting local, right? But she likes to say, let's invert that idea and let's act local, then think global. Because if you think global first, you get overwhelmed. There's so many problems in the world. But if I look outside my back door to my garden or my community or my school and look for things that could be going on that I could help with, which could be around local wildlife. It could be around supporting the local elderly community. It could be around the broader environment and tree planting or some such activity. Then if that happens locally and I can see that action, I can feel hope for what's going to happen at an international level, because I'm doing something in my backyard or my community and the next person along is doing that. If you start multiplying that idea by hundreds or thousands of people, then you can understand that suddenly you can have hope for the future.
Absolutely. So they buy a package, is that my understanding? It's like a box and it comes with a series of books and lesson plans and a whole range of materials.
No, so that's what you're talking about there is our resource box program,
right.
which goes into schools, and that's a free box that goes into schools, and that's designed to give teachers curriculum. It's very difficult to pronounce. Curriculum-linked resources that they can teach young people, and then out of that, hopefully some of those young people get persuaded to start a Roots and Shoots group in their local community. So it's a driver for Roots and Shoots. It's not the program itself.
Right.
The books in the resource box, some of which are created by us here in Australia, some are global texts that talk about international geography. They're beautifully produced books, 160-page colour books, and they have online lesson plans for the teachers. Those are activating those young people to give them great factual information and beautiful imagery and ideas about what they can do. And then they can join Roots and Shoots as a member and then go off and create their own solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. So Roots and Shoots, I'll call them young activists for want of a better word. They register and then off they go and develop their local program and I guess report back into you of the outcome of whatever they've achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got things like we have a mini grant program that schools or individual young people in the community can apply for every year. And they're just $250 and $500 grants. They're not huge amounts of money, but it's not about, well, in some ways it's about the money because that gives them the resources to buy some materials or equipment they might need to deliver their project. So they can get access to some, just small amounts of funding. But it's, as I said, it's not just about the money. Sometimes we find people that join up to Roots and Shoots, they just go and make things happen in their local community. They're really activated and empowered. And we've got, in every state in Australia, we have a state coordinator, a Roots and Shoots state coordinator, who's a volunteer, so not a paid staff member, a volunteer. And they follow up and keep inspiring those projects that have got going in their communities. So there's someone that young people can talk to and connect with and go, this is what I'm doing, or I need some help. I've got to this point, I'm a bit stuck. Can you help me? And that's the role of the state coordinator. So there's that volunteer network that we have across the country as well.
Did you notice an increase in interest after the floods and the bushfires? Did you suddenly find that schools and young people wanted to know more about how they could be more active, involved in terms of the environment?
Oh, look, 100%. And the bushfires particularly really activated a whole bunch of young people. In fact, one of our young people through Roots and Shoots who'd applied for a mini grant, a young girl called Kathie, who was 9 years old at the time, she applied for a mini grant, was successful, and she started a tube stock operation at her home on the south coast, creating native tree tube stock, which she then gave away to people in the community to start replanting trees in their community that had been lost in the bushfires. Just amazing sort of inspiration that, she saw a problem and she just got on and did something about it. We were able to help facilitate and support that. What that led to, quite surprisingly for Kaya and for us, is that the then Environment Minister in New South Wales, Matt Keane, awarded her the Banksia Award Climate Change Champion last December. So this young girl who just, saw a problem, we had a solution in the form of a small grant that she could apply for. She did that, and that enabled her to buy what she needed to do what she wanted to do. And then all of a sudden there was this amazing award that kind of fell out of the sky. And, she didn't expect that, but I guess that's a great symbol of how young people can also get this recognition, and that can inspire them to go on to do other things in life, And
absolutely.
What we're really trying to do with our programs, so just to give you a sense of the overarching vision we have, Kathie, is that from early childhood to early school leaver, we want a suite of programs that are going to put young people on a sort of a pipeline to engaging with an environmental practice and a sustainability mindset that sets them up for potentially some great careers in the future. And that's not just about conservation or ecology. There's also, agriculture and horticulture. There's, green-based jobs in landscaping and urban development. There's huge opportunities that are arising in this sort of green, sustainable space. And we really want to focus, coming back to the earlier point about dealing with disadvantage, we want to focus our programs on disadvantaged communities where the opportunities to get these extraordinary, in a sense, jobs of the future, I know that's a sort of hackneyed phrase, but it's bandied around, it's used, and in a sense it's relevant because we keep talking about the fact that the jobs that people accept as being normal today won't exist now.
Absolutely.
And the ones that are coming down the pipeline, the ones we want to get our young people ready for, we can start that process quite young, in the sense that what we know from the academic literature is young people who are more engaged with nature-based education are more likely to want to go on later in life and protect it and do something about it. We know that from what the literature is telling us. So we're just trying to sort of create programs that sort of fulfill that remit, as it were, and drive that forward. So we're seeing in 10, 20, 30 years' time, we're seeing a great bunch of leaders that are coming through our programs and others. I mean, there are others out there doing great work as well. We're not a silver bullet, that's for sure. That can help with that transformation of our community.
Okay, so that's really great in our own backyard. What about what Jane's known for? The looking at nature, wildlife, gorillas, chimpanzees. Where is that happening at the moment? Where are we with that, with Jane's work?
So, well, I mean, do you mean in the Institute or the work that Jane as an individual is doing? Well,
I guess what I'm saying is Jane's coming towards the end of her career, and her legacy will be, organisations like yourself. So where is her work focused at the moment?
So I guess there's two parts to that question. There's the work that Jane herself is doing, and then there's the work that her institute does, which bears her name. And the work that Jane is doing is speaking to as many people around the planet. And ironically, the pandemic's enabled her to speak to more people than ever she could before when she was, traveling 300 days of the year. And while she has got back on the road this year, she did her first trip to North America in March since the pandemic began. And she loves that ability to connect with people, right? And don't we all? I mean, Zoom's amazing. Look what we're doing today.
It's got its limitations.
But it has its limitations, but it also has its benefits. And that is she can stay in her house in Bournemouth in England, and she can speak to 10, 20, 100 times, 1,000 times more people in a year than she can by traveling. So, and her message and what she's doing from her perspective is inspiring people to take action, to get people to think about that every single day, each one of us can make a difference. And what we need to think about when we get up each morning is what's that difference we want to make.
Okay.
So that's her broader remit. She's calling on us all, no matter who we are, where we live on the planet, to think about the impact we're having and in terms of being positive or negative, and that we've got a choice every day in all the smallest decisions that we make, from the getting up in the morning and thinking about what food we're putting on the table and where is that coming from, to our transport, to our work, to supply chain. It's systemic in the way we need to think about how we're having an impact. And so, that's the work she's doing now. In terms of the Institute, coming back to the other part of your question, it's broken down into Africa programs, so supporting her traditional research and then the work protecting chimpanzees across sub-Saharan Africa. And we've got a presence across many of the countries, including Tanzania, Uganda, the Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, and more across Africa. And that's kind of our legacy piece in terms of the work we do. And as I mentioned before, it's not just about looking at chimps, it's looking at human communities. It's looking at how we create structural change that supports poverty alleviation, and we do that with programs like our Girls Empowerment Program in Uganda, which teaches young girls about family planning and encourages.
Didn't know that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, encouraging young people to stay in school and get an education, because we know these things all lead to greater personal and community-based outcomes that benefits the environment and benefits them economically. So, these problems can't be solved by just looking through a single prism. They need to be solved by thinking holistically. So there's the Africa program side of the work, and then there's the Roots and Shoots, which is what I've kind of mentioned, which is really about empowering the next generation of environmental leaders. And by environmental leaders, what I'm not saying is that young people who might be watching this program or their parents, that they need to become ecologists or botanists or scientists necessarily, although that's great. We want people going into any field of endeavour, any vocation, any profession, to take with them the fact that whatever you're doing, you're having an impact on the broader environment. and to think and rethink about how you can minimize that impact, because we need everyone rowing the boat to effectively create the change we need to prevent catastrophic impacts down the track, either from climate or from biodiversity loss.
Yeah, and that's one of the things for those watching that's been coming through this series. I spoke to somebody from Fiji, and they were talking about they're already reeling from the impact of climate change, and it's obviously playing out in the news here in Australia at the moment. But the commonality, and I like the link that you've shared, is he said to me, look, Kathie, we're in the midst of it. It's going to get worse. You do what you've got to do to survive. And, we were talking about having to relocate communities and all of those sorts of things, and loss of jobs and increase in domestic and family violence. And by you actually running human programs such as family planning and those things, you're actually looking at, it's not just about the environment, it's about how we relate to it. And you're right, if we stick to a silo, we'll never solve the problem, ever. And it could be catastrophic, which we're all trying to stay away from, but that is the reality if we don't bring about change. And we do know, and I'm going to talk to you about that, is that human behaviour can change pretty fast, like we did with the pandemic. Like all of a sudden we're all masked up, washing our hands, staying away from people. We can do it. That leads me to palm oil, which is just so prevalent in our supermarkets. And I didn't realise until I was doing some research into you that it's actually an emerging problem in African nations. It's traditionally been problems in sort of Malaysia, Indonesia countries, and it impacts on the wildlife. And we're perhaps bad shoppers by not really looking at the labels on the food products that we buy and what it can do. What's happening with palm oil in African countries?
Well, look, the problem is global in nature, but you're right. I mean, it's particularly bad in our local area in terms of region in Indonesia, but it's also prevalent across Africa. Look, I guess the point that I'd make about palm oil is that, and the policy that the Jane Goodall Institute has, is that we are supporters of responsible palm oil production, the RSPO, and the statements around that. There are those that would disagree with that viewpoint, and they're entitled to their views. And the reason we take that stance is that we believe that the alternatives to palm oil are even more damaging and harmful than the ones that manage the process of its production in a sustainable way and are accredited as such. So there is an accreditation process through the RSPO, and those things are something that we support because some of the alternatives are absolutely too much worse to contemplate. And again, it comes back to trying to find a balance between economic empowerment and environmental protection. And if you're too puritanical on one direction or the other, you may drive people into deeper poverty. So it's a balancing act, and no one is pretending that anyone is perfect on this. And sometimes this debate gets thrown into sort of in a direction that suggests that there is a perfect answer to some of the problems that we're facing. There aren't. There are imperfect answers to some of these problems, and as a consequence, we need to go. And Jane says this herself. Just focus on doing less harm. You don't have to become a vegetarian overnight. Just eat less meat. You don't have to become a vegan overnight. Just focus on being the best vegetarian, if that's your pathway, if that makes sense. There's also challenges around the palm oil conversation around labelling. I mean, you talk about palm oil labelling. I mean, we have very convoluted and complicated labelling laws in Australia, and one of the ways that companies can make this easier for consumers is ensuring that they are meeting the RSPO standards around sustainable palm oil, and that's clear on their packaging, and that they're not greenwashing it. And that makes it then easier for consumers, and you're not having to dive through a bazillion different versions of how palm oil can be labelled or hidden in terms of labelling, because it can be described as all sorts of different things that might not be terribly clear to the uninitiated. So I think it's the responsibility of not just the supermarket chains, but the companies that are producing these products to ensure that their supply chains are clear and clean, as clean as they can be. So yeah, that's the.
So we're in the midst of what they say is the sixth great extinction, or what does that mean to a layperson that simply likes their animals at home, that doesn't really understand it all?
Yeah, well, look, the sixth great extinction, I guess, refers to the fact that we've reached an ecological tipping point in terms of the ability for the Earth to sustain life at the level that it has done for the last several millennia, and that is creating a problem. There are a number of great documentaries about this, but I like to think of it as like a game of Jenga. And if people want to think about how biodiversity or a healthy ecosystem works, is there are millions of connections that are going on that are not necessarily apparent or visible to us. And when we remove a species, people might read the news, watch the news, or listen to the news, and they hear about some endangered species that's going extinct, or they're trying to bring back from the brink of extinction. And for a layperson, that might be, well, so what? If the orange-bellied parrot or the regent honeyeater or the northern quoll or whatever species it happens to be, the Tasmanian devil, if that goes extinct, why should I care, and how's that going to impact me? And I've got to send this kids to school, and these things don't seem immediately important.
No.
But the key about our natural systems is they are in a form of balance. And when we start removing species from them, what we're doing is we're pulling out of that kind of balanced system elements of it that has knock-on effects. People often talk about apex predators, for example. You remove an apex predator out of an ecosystem, and that can knock on to all sorts. Suddenly you get explosions of other animals that then overeat the vegetation, and then that vegetation's lost, and suddenly the hillside's bare, and then you get a flood, and then suddenly that hillside gets washed away, and you lose all that topsoil. So suddenly all these impacts start cascading and building upon each other. And I think the thing that people need to be concerned about is that as these impacts start ratcheting up, we're a very urbanized nation. We live in cities, and we are often insulated from a lot of the effects of massive weather events and so forth. But I think we've seen this year, particularly along the east coast of Australia, that those impacts are being felt and very real now. And that's just going to increase. And the costs of these events are going to increase. I mean, there are some out there that say, we need to be mindful about the economic cost of taking action on climate change. Well, I'd be asking, what's the cost of not taking action? All you have to do is go and talk to insurance actuaries that are doing the numbers on insurance claims are going to be on, expensive waterfront property along the east coast of Australia, and you'll get a clear idea what the costs of inaction are going to be. And that's just in hard, economic terms. That's not fluffy, losing particular endangered species. That's, an insurance premium. People in Lismore are either going to be uninsurable, like insurance companies just simply won't offer them flood insurance, or the costs will be just completely out of the park and you won't be able to afford it. So all of a sudden we're witnessing, potentially right in front of our very eyes, the possibility that many residents in Lismore will be relocating.
Absolutely.
Are they going to choose to rebuild? Some of them will. And I know that there's an infrastructure project being developed by the New South Wales government to address this and look into it. But, you know, that's fine. People will make decisions to stay. Some will make decisions to go. I've got really close friends that live in that region, and I know that that's a real struggle because that's the community they're connected to. It's like, you know, uprooting yourself and moving. That's really challenging. And we're going to see this happening, and we're seeing it happening in Australia. We're going to see it happening, and it is happening in the Pacific, with many of the Pacific islands and how low lying they are. We're going to see it in areas like Bangladesh, around India and the subcontinent. So these impacts are going to keep piling on top of each other, and then we're going to see massive movements of people. So we think we have a refugee problem today. I hate to think what it might look like if we don't continue taking substantive action in 50 years' time.
Absolutely.
With places just becoming unlivable.
That's a really good segue to, I spoke to the climate chaplain who runs anxiety healing circles for climate activists, and I joined one. It was fascinating how real the anxiety is with young people if we don't take control, and how many of them are feeling a loss of hope, and the interconnectedness of the issues that you're talking about, you know, geopolitical, refugees, you know, weather events, poverty, vulnerability, all of those things play out, colonialism, all of those things. And what I got to is this work is taxing for everybody, and you really can't do it without really looking after yourself as well, which leads to my last question. So James, how do you take care of you in all of this? What's your self-care practice? Is it connecting with nature? Is it chilling out with family? What do you do to make sure that you're bouncing back and able to address such big problems?
What's my self-care practice? I think, look, definitely reconnecting with nature. Nature has these kind of invisible benefits that it provides us when we decouple from the hecticness of, you know, modern life, if I can put it like that, and go and just commune. I know that might sound to some people like, you know, all a bit woo-woo, but I know for a fact that it's made a huge difference in my life, and it really is a way to heal and refresh and to reset the mind and the body and so on. So nature engagement is a big part of it. And that's why I think, you know, greening our cities is so important, and doing more work in urban environments to have more green space is just so essential. But I do other things. I love reading, which gets me off screens, and I don't read on Kindles or that. I like the smell of. I love the smell of a book and the pages, and they get quite dog-eared with me. You know, so and I enjoy reading fiction, non-fiction. I'm a sewer, so I also do a bit of tapestry. I haven't got my tapestry near me at the moment, but yeah, so I like a bit of needlepoint. And I've been doing that since I was about 9 or 10 years old. I probably wasn't the most normal child going around, but my mother was passionate about needlepoint, and so was my grandfather. So it sort of runs in the family. And I find that those sorts of meditative, you know, whether it's reading, whether it's dropping into nature, whether it's sewing, you know, getting off these things and these things, you know, is important in our modern age. I was just listening to the ABC before, and there was a university researcher talking about how screen time in young people had jumped by 90% or whatever the statistic was. It was a horrifying statistic. It made worse over the pandemic, where kids were engaging with screen time a lot more. I think obviously technology is great, and it enables us to do all sorts of things like have this conversation in the way that we are, and it's got us through the pandemic in a way that we couldn't have imagined 20 years ago if we'd had the pandemic in the late 90s.
True.
We would have all been struggling with faxes and all that sort of thing. So I think just having and I love the garden. So I get into my garden. I'm trying to create a bird, bee, and butterfly garden. So I'm creating a garden that creates habitat for wildlife at home. It's a combination of native and exotic plants, and it's a home for lizards and birds and anything that wants to call it home. So if you can I think create a little bit of space for wildlife in your urban environment, or even in your rural or regional environment. You don't have to live in the city to focus on that. I've got friends who are farmers who are really passionate about nature, and in the old days with farms, you didn't have a good farm unless the paddock was clean. Nowadays the farmers leave the fallen trees because they know that they're a bedrock of wildlife and sustainability. So they have those fallen trees, and that creates habitat for snakes, for lizards, etc., etc. So.
Well, you sound as though you've got a pretty good self-care practice happening there, and I'd love to see one of your needleworks at some point in time.
Sure.
So that's certainly one of the most interesting answers I've had. Although I had somebody that was a belly dancer, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
So I've got to say a big thank you for joining us today, James, and we hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
My pleasure, Kathie. Lovely to be with you.